Okay, we're looking at books 5 and 6 today. And with it, so we'll begin with the where we left off last time, which is, actually I didn't even get to it last time. Satan crouches in the form of a toad by Eve's ear and whispers things in her ears, which she finds extremely disturbing. And he's caught in the act by a few of the angels. As you see, Uriel had spotted him, sends down the troops find him, and threat of a big fight on earth exists, and God gives a sign in the heavens not to do this, and they allow Satan to retreat, and so he's temporarily thwarted in this. But book 5 picks it up, in which Eve relates to Adam this dream, and then they go to, we move to the divine council, God speaking to Raphael apologizing that this ever happened, God excusing him for that, and again reminding Adam to be vigilant and be faithful, etc. And comes to him and tells Adam of his state and that of his enemy. So again, there's a lot of happenstance here that you will not find in Scripture at all. So first of all, the first temptation, this is actually in book 4 at the end of it with the toad. That's the first temptation, obviously not in Scripture. And likewise, the warning, the repeated emphasis, God's or Adam, or third time, Milton seems to be wanting to make it abundantly clear that God is in no way responsible for what happens. Now, does the biblical text not do this? Well, it does. But in terms of a narrative and to justify the ways of God to men, Milton seems to find it dramatically necessary to include these passages wherein Adam is expressly forewarned not only of the fact that he shouldn't eat of the fruit of the tree, but there's an enemy about, and he should be vigilant and watchful of it. Remember, he's there to tend and protect the garden. Back in Genesis 2, it said that. He's there to tend and protect. So particular emphasis on that, but also on God's part, I guess he's even more cautious in explaining this. The duties necessary there. And what he will then do is explain who the enemy is and talk about the first war in heaven. So that, and I'm going to focus on that and the war that ensues, rather than the beginning of book 5. But I'll do a little bit of the beginning of book 5, but we're going to focus on the war in heaven and how that comes about. And as I say, that's the sort of the pivotal point that begins the whole narrative, is the revolt in heaven that comes from Satan's thoughts that he was diminished at the exaltation of the Son of God. That's the initiating event to the whole narrative, and it's put there right here in book 5. But let's look at the beginning here, and I'll read a few passages. Now morn, her rosy steps in the eastern clime advancing, sowed the earth with orient pearl, when Adam waked, so customed, for his sleep was airy light, from pure digestion bred, and temperate vapors bland, which the only sound of leaves and fuming rills Aurora's fan lightly dispersed, and the shrill matin song of birds on every bough. So much the more his wonder was to find unwakened Eve with tresses discomposed, and glowing cheek, as though unquiet rest, he on his side leaning, half raised, with looks of cordial love hung over her enamored, and beheld beauty, which, whether waking or asleep, shot forth peculiar graces. Then, with voice mild as when Zephyrus on Flora breathes, her hand soft touching, whispered thus: Awake, my fairest, my espoused, my latest found, heaven's last best gift, my ever new delight. Awake, the morning shines and the fresh field calls us. We lose the prime to mark how spring our tended plants, how blows the citron grove, what drops the myrrh and what the balmy reed. How nature paints her colors, how the bee sits on the bloom extracting liquid sweet. Such whispering waked her, but with startled eye on Adam, whom embracing thus she spake. So I just think the language is beautiful here. Again, tender, appropriate, not a word out of place, and expresses the extraordinary love that Adam has for his bride and co-partner in God's grace, Eve. And she wakes and accounts to him what led to the blush on her cheek that he was surprised to find, a glowing cheek and tresses discomposed. So her hair is out of place, as if she's been tossing and turning. There's a twisting of her hair. Again, it's sort of a symbol of her internal state. So the external signs of an internal distress. Note, not yet sin. Is it possible to be disturbed when you're an unfallen being? Yes. Because she's been distressed from without, not yet from within. That's important. When God the Son is tempted in every way and yet without sin, the temptation comes from without. There's no internal response to that. Jesus never thinks a sinful thought. He is tempted, however, with every sinful possibility there. So it's an external, not an internal response. That's hard for us to register because we immediately do both simultaneously. Anyway, what does she say? O soul in whom my thoughts find all repose, my glory, my perfection, glad I see thy face, and morn return. For I this night, such night, till this I never passed, have dreamed. If dreamed, not as I oft am wont, of thee, works of day past, or morrow's next design, but of offense and trouble, which my mind never knew till this irksome night. Methought, close at mine ear, one called me forth to walk with gentle voice. I thought it thine. I thought it thine, and what does it say? It said, why sleepst thou, Eve? Now is the pleasant time, the cool, the silent, save where silence yields to the night warbling bird, that now awake tunes sweetest his love-labored song, now reigns full-orbed the moon, and with more pleasing light, shadowy, sets off the face of things. Note that the devil tempts her at night under the influence of the moon, and the moon is Milton will acknowledge this, but it's not yet the case. The world's not fallen, but the moon has the effect of inspiring a sort of lunacy, the lunae. And of course, its light is a reflective light. It's not direct. The sun produces light. The moon reflects the light of the sun. And so there is a certain type of light, but again, it's not the direct light of truth. And it's so fitting of Milton to cast the first temptation in that light. And with more pleasing light, shadowy sets up the face of things. In vain, if none regard. Heaven wakes with all his eyes, whom to behold, but thee, nature's desire, in whose sight all things joy, with ravishment attracted by thy beauty still to gaze. I rose as at thy call, but found thee not. To find thee I directed then my walk, and on, methought, alone I passed through ways that brought me on a sudden to the tree of interdicted knowledge. Fair it seemed, much fairer to my fancy than by day. And as I wondering looked, beside it stood one shaped and winged, like one of those from heaven, by us oft seen, his dewy locks distilled ambrosia. On that plant he also gazed. On that, oh fair plant, said he, with fruit surcharged, Deigns none to ease thy load and taste thy sweet, nor God, nor man? Is knowledge so despised, or envy, or what reserve forbids to taste? Forbid who will, none shall from me withhold longer thy offered good. Why else set here? This said, he paused not, but with venturous arm he plucked, he tasted. Me damp horror chilled at such bold words, vouched with a deed so bold. But he thus enjoyed, O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet, thus cropped, forbidden here. It seems as only fit for gods, yet able to make gods of men. And why not gods of men? Since good, the more communicated, more abundant grows, the author not impaired, but honored more. Here, happy creature, fair angelic Eve, partake thou also. Happy though thou art, happier thou mayest be, worthier canst not be. Taste this, and be henceforth among the gods thyself, a goddess, not to earth confined, but sometimes in the air, as we, sometimes ascend to heaven, by merit thine, and see what life the gods live there. And such live thou. So saying, he drew nigh, and to me held, even to my mouth, of that same fruit, held part which he had plucked. The pleasant, savory smell so quickened appetite that I, methought, could not but taste. Forthwith up to the clouds with him I flew, and underneath beheld the earth outstretched immense, the prospect wide and various, wondering at my flight and changed to this high exaltation. Suddenly my guide was gone, and methought sunk down and fell asleep. But oh, how glad I waked to find this but a dream. Thus Eve her night related, and thus Adam answered Sat. So she's given the first temptation, and here it's an angelic figure that stands there and eats of it and promises the same sorts of thing we're going to find are promised in the second temptation in book 9 that's successful. Here it's interrupted by the angels right in the middle of the temptation. She thinks it's a dream. It's not a dream. Satan had given her the fruit, and it's right in front of her, and had she eaten of it, presumably there would be some sort of fall that would have ensued. Very interesting here in the footnote. Adam's response to her on this: best image of myself and dearer half. Note the footnotes here. He refers to her as his best image, much as the Son is spoken of as the Father's image. And there's a symmetry there, but the symmetry does not hold when we consider that the Son is not only the best image of the Father, but also the executor of all his power. She has no such role. That's because there's not a unity. There are two persons here, or two discrete beings. There's not one of them, but rather two. So Eve is maybe his best image, but she's not the executive for him, and that's important because Adam will remain the executive. That means he's the one who's responsible to God, chiefly. It's not that she has none, but helpful footnote there, I think, in the online text. I'm going to skip over the passage in which Raphael comes to the Father and apologizes for what has just transpired, and skip forward to line where Raphael recounts to Adam and Eve God's will, and forewarns them of the enemy abroad and the threat that he poses to them. And he hails her in much the same way we see that Eve is hailed in the Annunciation. And I think there's a deliberate not just foreshadowing, but parallelism here. On whom the angel Hail bestowed the holy salutation used long after to bless Mary, second Eve. Hail, Mother of mankind, whose fruitful womb shall fill the world more numerous with thy sons than with these various fruits. The trees of God have heaped this table. Raised of grassy turf their table was, and mossy seats had round. And on her ample square from side to side all autumn plied, or piled, though spring and autumn here danced hand in hand. The seasons are not yet differentiated. The spring is the beginning of the fruits. The autumn is the harvest. They're not separated. It's maybe there's a because of speed, there's not a slow maturation process, but whatever, there isn't the signs of the fall and winter that comes as a consequence of the fall, chiefly. But anyway, they are together. Spring and autumn here danced hand in hand. A while discourse they hold, no fear lest dinner cool. When thus begun, our author being Adam, heavenly stranger, pleased to taste these bounties which are nourisher, from whom all perfect good unmeasured out descends, for to us for food and for delight hath caused the earth to yield. Unsavory food perhaps to spiritual natures. Only this I know, that one celestial Father gives to all, to whom the angel. Therefore, what he gives, whose praise be ever sung, to man in part spiritual may of purest spirits be found, no ingrateful food. And food alike, whose pure intelligential essences require, as doth your rational. So, they require, they are intelligences. Man has a rational nature. Very important. Emphasis on Milton's part. Some deny it in Christian circles in our day, that man has an individual rational nature, although it's a clear emphasis in the patristic age and the councils of the church. But both the intelligential substances and the rational substances both contain with them every lower faculty of sense, whereby they hear, see, smell, touch, taste, and tasting concoct, digest, assimilate, and corporeal to incorporeal turn. So we take physical essences, the food we consume, and it gets assimilated, broken down to the point where even our spirits are nourished. And that, by that I mean our rationality, which is an immaterial thing. It's a spiritual thing. How do we feed our reason? Well, partly through reading and thinking, but it's also even through bodily means. There's a sort of a connection point there. How is it possible? Well, this is what's being discussed here. Because we talk about the mind-body distinction, but how does the body actually feed the mind? You can say through the brain and through chemistry, but it seems that's a little simplistic. There's more to it than that. Because again, the mind is a not only just an invisible thing, but a spiritual attribute, and yet it's connected to bodily feeding and so forth. And here's the explanation for this. For know, he says, whatever was created needs to be sustained and fed. Of elements, the grosser feeds the purer. So it goes upward. So what is lower is serving the higher rather than the other way around. Now again, this is the exact opposite that we will find in an evolutionary account, where the motivation for everything is the inferior. So it's ascribed to lusts or to genetic necessities and so forth. Here it's the contrary. Of elements, the grosser feeds the purer, earth, the sea. Earth and the sea feed air, the air those fires ethereal, and as lowest fire, the moon, whence in her visage round those spots, unpurged vapors not yet into her substance turned. Nor doth the moon no nourishment exhale from her moist continent to higher orbs. The sun that light imparts to all receives from all his elemental recompense, in humid exhalations, and at even sups with the ocean. Though in heaven the trees of life ambrosial fruitage bear, and vines yield nectar, though from off the boughs each morn we brush mellifluous dews, and find the ground covered with pearly grain. Yet God hath here varied his bounty, so with new delights as may compare with heaven. And to taste, think not I shall be nice. And by nice here, he means too refined to engage. I'm going to happily eat with you, the angel guest. And so they sit down, because even though he's a spiritual being and in a sense higher than Adam as the man of clay, it still will nourish him because it rises up. And so down they sat, and to their viands fell, nor seemingly the angel, nor in midst the common gloss of theologians, but with keen dispatch of real hunger and concoctive heat to transubstantiate. This is very interesting because, of course, when Christ is resurrected and it presents himself visibly to the disciples, he also sits and eats with them. A very interesting thing. To have a body is to be a creature. A physical body is to be a creature. So even when the Son of God is raised, he retains a human body, and the connection between God and man is maintained here. And so there's a dependency even in the human aspect of the divine human nature, which is dependent on God, while at the same being the one who provides for the man. So that connection, the mediator, the God-man Jesus Christ, are articulated here in terms of even to the point of eating. Too little written about that by theologians, but at any rate. So, and then it is transubstantiated even. There's a lot that could be connected in this, but I'll skip over it for now and move onwards. Meanwhile at table Eve ministered naked, and their flowing cups with pleasant liquors crowned. O innocence deserving paradise, says Milton. O innocence deserving paradise. If ever, then had the sons of God excuse to have been enamored at the sight. Excuse to have been enamored at that sight. But in those hearts, love unlibidinous reigned, nor jealousy was understood, the injured lover's hell. Okay, so that's how it begins. And then Adam has a question for Raphael, and Raphael's happy to give the answer. And the question is this: inhabitant with God, now know I well thy favor in this honor done to man, under whose lowly roof thou hast vouchsafed to enter, and these earthly fruits to taste, food not of angels, yet accepted so, as that more willingly thou couldst not seem at heaven's high feast to have fed. Yet what compare? To whom the winged hierarch replied, O Adam, one Almighty is, from whom all things proceed, and up to him return, if not depraved from good, created all such to perfection, one first matter all, endued with various forms, various degrees of substance, and in things that live of life, but more refined, more spirituous and pure, as nearer to him placed, or nearer tending, each in their several active spheres assigned, till body up to spirit work, in bounds proportioned to each kind. Now he's talking about the different, not degrees of being, but the different varieties from the bodily to the spiritual. It's not degrees of being, but it's varieties of being. If it were degree, there would be it would suggest that a body were somehow lesser, and it's not lesser in the sense of having being. It has its being. It's just a different type. And so from the root springs lighter the green stalk, and from thence the leaves more airy last the bright consummate flower, spirits odorous breathe. So the comparison is that of a flower. So there's something more substantial at the bottom that upholds the less substantial, and the more beautiful, etc. That's an analogy that he gives here towards the spiritual reality of God. Flowers and their fruit, man's nourishment. By gradual scale, sublimed to vital spirits pure. Again, this is what happens when you eat. You're not just giving yourself nutrition. Your spirits are being nourished. Not just your body, your spirit is in some way. It's being sublimed. To animal, to intellectual. Give both life and sense, fancy and understanding, whence the soul reason receives. And reason is her being. Discursive or intuitive. Discourse is often yours. The latter most is ours. So discourse is the means of reasoning that mankind uses. The intuition is more of an angelic attribute and means of reasoning, a different type of. So we use words, we use conversation. And they more will use their intellectual, more of an internalized means. Differing but in degree, of kind the same. Interesting. Wonder not then what God for you saw good, if I refuse not, but convert, as you to proper substance. Time may come when men with angels may participate, and find no inconvenient diet, nor too light fare. And from these corporeal nutriments, perhaps your bodies may at last turn all to spirit, improved by tract of time, and winged ascend ethereal as we, or may at choice here or in heavenly paradises dwell, if ye be found obedient, and retain unalterably firm his love entire, whose progeny you are. Meanwhile, enjoy your fill what happiness this happy state can comprehend, and capable of more. So he is speculating here about a possibility that Adam are not yet fully developed, and they will, in accordance with the way with their dominion mandate to make an Eden out of the whole earth, they themselves will also become something even superior to what they already are. Not of different kind, but of degree. They're going to remain human. They will have what Jesus has, a resurrection body, a spiritual body. Maybe that was the aim of humanity from the beginning. And I would think that there's a good warrant for that view, represented here by Milton. That they're not yet fully developed, and eventually they will be progressing a ladder of perfection, as it were. So a quotation from Isaiah 1:19, if you be willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, well, then you will be devoured by the sword. And Adam responds to this speech, O favorable spirit, well hast thou taught the way that might direct our knowledge. And the scale of nature set from center to circumference, whereon in contemplation of created things by steps we may ascend to God. But say, what meant that caution joined, if ye be found obedient? Can we want, as in lack, obedience? Then to him, who, or possibly his love desert, who formed us from the dust and placed us here full to the utmost measure of what bliss human desires conceive or apprehend? Is it even possible for us to fall? Like, who would ever think such a crazy idea? Why would we do such a thing? To whom the angel, son of God and earth, son of heaven and earth, attend that thou art happy, O to God, that thou continuest such, O to thyself. That is, to thy obedience. Therein stand. This was the caution given thee. Be advised. God made thee perfect, not immutable. And you can see that in two ways. He's made Adam perfect, but he can change. He can become, ascend the ladder of being, become more spiritual, become more perfect. Or you can go the other way. So he's made perfect. That doesn't mean unchangeable. You can see it both ways. through disobedience, but also through obedience. And this is the thing that we will never know what might have been, except that we are told in the new heaven and the new earth that we will be like God, and we will have a being in the presence of God and as spiritual beings, which was God's plans from the beginning. I think this is what is being stated. So when Jesus rises from the dead and has a spiritual being such that he continues to eat and take delight, but it can also go through walls and seems to have, there's something insubstantial about him. This is a description of human nature as it was probably intended by God from the beginning. That's Milton's speculation, seems to be suggested here. And it would fit with the idea that God from the beginning knew what would happen in the temptation and the fall, and would not be thwarted in any way. He's not going to plan B. Good he made thee, but to persevere he left in thy power. By nature free, ordain thy will by nature free, not overruled by fate, inextricable, or strict necessity. Our voluntary service he requires, not our necessitated. Such with him finds no acceptance, nor can find. For how can hearts not free be tried whether they serve willingly or no? Who will but what they must by destiny, and can no other choose? Myself and all the angelic hosts that stand in sight of God enthroned, our happy state hold as you yours, while our obedience holds. On other surety, none. Freely we serve, because we freely love, as in our will to love or not. In this we stand or fall. Great line. God, first 5:24, God made thee perfect, not immutable, and 5:38, freely we serve because we freely love, as in our will to love or not. In this we stand or fall. And some are fallen. To disobedience fallen, and so from heaven to deepest hell. Oh, fall from what high state of bliss into what woe. Okay, so now he finally recounts that some have in fact broken the trust that they were given. To whom our great progenitor, thy words attentive, and with more delighted ear, divine instructor, I have heard, than when cherubic songs by night from neighboring hills aerial music send. Nor knew I not to be both will and deed created free. Yet that we never shall forget to love our Maker and obey him whose command single is yet so just, my constant thoughts assured me and still assure. Though what thou tellest hath passed in heaven, some doubt within me move, but more desire to hear, which must needs be strange, worthy of sacred silence to be heard. And we have yet large day, for scarce the sun hath finished half his journey. And so Adam asks him, tell me, how did this fall of the angels happen? 563. High matter thou enjoinest me, O prime of men. Sad task and hard. By the way, that these lines, sad task and hard, will be echoed by Milton in Book 9 of Paradise Lost, to tell of the fall of mankind. It echoed. Same language. Fall of the angels, fall of man. Sad task and hard. For how shall I relate to human sense the invisible exploits of warring spirits? How without remorse the ruin of so many glorious, once and perfect while they stood? How last unfold the secrets of another world? Perhaps not lawful to reveal. Yet for thy good this is dispensed, and what surmounts the reach of human sense I shall delineate so, by likening spiritual to corporal forms. So there's going to be an analogy going on. It's accommodation. I'm going to accommodate into your terms a spiritual rebellion. I'm going to put it in physical terms so that you can understand them, as may express them best. Though what if earth be but the shadow of heaven, and things therein each to other like, more than on earth is thought? And yet this world was not. And so here's how he begins. And yet this world was not, and chaos wild reigned where these heavens now roll, where earth now rests. Upon her center poised, when on a day, for time, though in eternity applied to motion, measures all things durable by present, past, and future. On such a day as heaven's great year brings forth, the imperial host of angels by imperial summons called, innumerable before the Almighty's throne, forthwith from all the ends of heaven appeared. Upon their hierarchs in orders bright, 10,000 ensigns high advanced, standards and gonfalons, twixt van and rear stream in the air, and for distinction serve of hierarchies, of orders and degrees, or in their glittering tissues bear emblazed holy memorials, acts of love, of zeal and love recorded eminent. Thus, when in orbs of circuit inexpressible they stood, orb within orb, the Father infinite, by whom in bliss embosomed sat the Son, amidst as from a flaming mount, whose top brightness had made visible, thus spake the Father, hear all ye angels, progeny of light, thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, hear my decree, which unrevoked shall stand. This day I have begot whom I declare my only Son, and on this holy hill him have anointed, whom ye now behold at my right hand. Your head I him appoint, and by himself have sworn, to him shall bow all knees in heaven, and shall confess him Lord. Under his great vice-regent reign, abide united as one individual soul, forever happy. Him who disobeys me, disobeys, breaks union, and that day cast out from God in blessed vision, falls into utter darkness, deep engulfed, his place ordained without redemption, without end. So God here even gives the warning to the angelic beings before. So spake the Omnipotent, and with his words all seemed pleased. All seemed, but were not all. That day, as other solemn days, they spent in song and dance about the sacred hill, mystical dance, which yonder starry sphere of planets and affixed in all her wheels resembles nearest. Mazes intricate, eccentric, intervolved, yet regular, then most, when most irregular they seem. And in their motions harmony divine so smooths her charming tones that God's own ear listens delighted. The Neoplatonists held that the astrological proportions could arouse resonance between the soul and a planet. And we talked about that already in relation to music. There's a harmony there in the constellation, the spheres that go with the musica humana, as well as the musica mundana, etc. There's a music there, and there's a proportion to it. Evening now approached, for we have our also evening and our morn. We hours for change delectable, not need. Forthwith from dance to sweet repast they turn, desirous all in circles as they stood. Tables are set, and all on a sudden piled with angels' food, and rubied nectar flows, in pearl, in diamond, and massy gold. I'm going to skip over the description of the divine banquet here. I apologize here. And with the happy scene, but not so, where is it? There it is. But not so waked Satan. So call him now. His former name is heard no more in heaven. He of the first, if not the first archangel, great in power, in favor and preeminence, yet fraught with envy against the Son of God. That day honored by his great Father and proclaimed Messiah anointed, who could not bear through pride that sight and thought himself impaired. Deep malice thence conceiving and disdain, soon as midnight brought on the dusky hour, friendliest to sleep and silenced, he resolved with all his legions to dislodge and leave unworshipped. Unobeyed the throne supreme, contemptuous, and his next subordinate awakening, thus to him in secret spake in secret. So, he thought himself impaired. So here's the key turning point there. This moment that he thought that the Messiah's exaltation was his diminishment in some ways. He was impaired. In other words, and what is he motivated by? Nothing other than pride. And he speaks to these others whom he knows also are displeased at what has just transpired, that the God, the Son, has been raised above them all at the Father's behest. Calls upon them to arm. But he's deceiving them. It's not entirely open war here yet, by the way. Sleep'st thou, companion dear? I'll read over it. What sleep can close thy eyelids? And rememberest what decree of yesterday so late hath passed the lips of heaven's Almighty? Thou to me thy thoughts wast wont, I mine to thee was wont to impart. Both waking we were one. How then can now thy sleep dissent? New laws thou seest imposed, new laws from him who reigns. New minds may raise in us who serve, new counsels to debate what doubtful may ensue. More in this place to utter is not safe. Assemble thou of all those myriads which we lead the chief. Tell them that by command, ere yet dim night her shadowy cloud withdraws, I am to haste, and all who under me their banners wave, homeward with flying march where we possess the quarters of the north. There to prepare fit entertainment to receive our King, the great Messiah, and his new commands, who speedily, through all the hierarchies, intends to pass triumphant and give laws. So the commander of the armies of the north, from Isaiah 14. Does it sound familiar from Tolkien? Yeah. Picked up from here, obviously. Has called them to honor the king. That's what Satan says. That's not what he intends. He's going to get them there to create a rebellion and not to honor at all. But they don't realize that. And so spake the false archangel, says Milton, and infused bad influence into the unwary breast of his associate. He together calls, or several one by one the regent powers under him regent, tells, as he was taught, that the Most High commanding, now ere night, now ere dim night had disencumbered heaven, the great hierarchical standard was to move. Tells the suggested cause and casts between ambiguous words and jealousies to sound or taint integrity, but all obeyed the wonted signal and superior voice of their great potentate, for great indeed his name. And high was his degree in heaven. His countenance at the morning star that guides the starry flock allured them, and with lies drew after him the third part of heaven's host. Meanwhile, so again, reference here explicitly to the passage in Revelation 12, right? And meanwhile, the eternal eye, whose sight discerns abstrusest thoughts, from forth his holy mount and from within the golden lamps that burn nightly before him, saw without their light rebellion rising, saw in whom how spread among the sons of morn, what multitudes were banded to oppose his high decree, and smiling to his only son thus said, Son, thou in whom my glory I behold in full resplendence, heir of all my might, nearly it now concerns us to be sure of our omnipotence, and with what arms we mean to hold what anciently we claim of deity or empire. Such a foe is rising, who intends to erect his throne equal to ours throughout the spacious north. Nor so content, hath in his thought to try in battle what our power is, or our right. Let us advise, and to this hazard draw with speed what force is left, and all employ in our defense, lest unawares we lose this our high place, our sanctuary, our hill. And then the son responds, Mighty Father, thou thy foes justly hath in derision, and secure laughs at their vain designs and tumults vain. Reference to Psalm 2, right? Matter to me of glory, whom their hate illustrates, when they see all regal power given me to quell their pride, and in event know whether I be dexterous to subdue thy rebels, or be found the worst in heaven. So spake the Son. But Satan with his powers far was advanced on winged speed, and host innumerable as the stars of night, or stars of morning, dewdrops which the sun impearls on every leaf and every flower, regions they passed. And they build what? 760? The palace of great Lucifer. So they call that structure in the dialect of men interpreted. This is the moment of Satan's great fall, when he builds a tower for himself, or a palace right here. So there's the deeds that are a consequence of the thoughts. He builds a palace here. And Satan's loss of his true name, Lucifer here. The boastful one. That structure in the dialect of men interpreted, which not long after he affecting all equality with God, in imitation of that mount whereon Messiah was declared in sight of heaven, the mountain of the congregation called. For thither he assembled all his train, pretending, so commanded, to consult about the great reception of their king. Thither to come, and with calumnious art of counterfeited truth, thus held their ears. So note that the 1/3 of the angels who's come here in rebellion have no idea that they're rebelling. They think that they are praising. They're here called to praise, and the orders come from on high. So he's using his power and authority given to him by his rank in heaven to effect a transformation. Thus work the princes of this world. They use power and authority and feigned fidelity to work counterfeit truth. And what does he say then in his great speech? Thrones, domination, sounds exactly like God the Father. Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, if these magnific titles yet remain, not merely titular, since by decree another now hath to himself engrossed all power, and us eclipsed under the name of King anointed, for whom all this haste of midnight march and hurried meeting here, this only to consult how we may best, with what may be devised of honors new, receive him coming to receive from us need tribute, yet unpaid, prostration vile, too much to one, but double how endured, to one and to his image now proclaimed. But what if better counsels might erect our minds and teach us to cast off his yoke? While will ye submit your necks and choose to bend the supple knee? Ye will not, if I trust to know ye right. For if ye know yourselves natives and sons of heaven, possessed before by none, and if not equal all, yet free, equally free, for orders and degrees jar not with liberty, but well consist. Who can in reason then, or right, assume monarchy over such as live by right his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal? So the claim is that by God anointing the Father anointing his Son king, they are losing their freedom, they are losing their dignity, they are losing their very nature. And he's made not only one tyrant, but two. It, in a sense, it's an act of insubordination on God's part. So goes the accusation. Or can introduce law in edict on us, who without law err not, much less for this to be our Lord, and look for adoration to the abuse of those imperial titles which assert our being ordained to govern, not to serve. Thus far, his bold discourse, without control, had audience. When, among the seraphim, Abdiel, than whom none with more zeal adored the deity, and divine commands obeyed, stood up, and in a flame of zeal severe, the current of his fury thus opposed. O argument blasphemous, false, and proud, words which no ear ever to hear in heaven expected, least of all from thee, ingrate, in place thyself so high above thy peers. Canst thou with impious obloquy condemn the just decree of God pronounced and sworn, that to his only Son, by right endued with regal scepter, every soul in heaven shall bend the knee, and in that honor do confess him rightful King? Unjust, thou sayest, flatly unjust, to bind with laws the free, and equal over equals to let reign, one over all with unsucceeded power? Shalt thou give law to God? Shalt thou dispute with him the points of liberty, who made thee what thou art, and formed the powers of heaven, such as he pleased, and circumscribed their being? Yet by experience taught, we know how good, and of our good, and of our dignity, how provident he is, how far from thought to make us less, bent rather to exalt our happy state under one head more near united, but to grant it thee unjust, that equal over equals monarch reign? Thyself, thou great and glorious, dost thou count of or all angelic nature joined in one, equal to him begotten Son, by whom, as by his word the mighty Father made all things, even thee, and all the spirits of heaven by him created in their bright degrees, crowned them with glory, and to their glory named thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, essential powers, nor by his reign obscured, but more illustrious made, since he the head, one of our number, thus reduced becomes. His laws, our laws, all honor to him done, returns our own. Cease then this impious rage, and tempt not these, but hasten to appease the incensed Father and the incensed Son, while pardon may be found in time besought. So we have one angel who comes out from the crowd and opposes this, and heroic in so doing, and rejecting the whole premise of the argument that an injustice has been done here, rather and that they have been diminished. On the contrary, by naming the Son the head of them all, he's a part of them all. He's diminishing himself. I'm one of you, even though he's your creator. So spake the fervent angel, but his zeal none seconded. As out of season judged. It's not the right time to say these sorts of things. Or singular and rash, whereat rejoiced the apostate, and more haughty thus replied, that we were formed, then sayest thou, and the work of secondary hands by task transferred from Father to his Son? Strange point, and new doctrine which we would know whence learned. Who saw when his creation was? Remembers thou thy making, while the Maker gave thee being? We know no time when we were not as now. None know before us, self-begot, self-raised by our own quickening power. When fatal course had circled his full orb, the birth mature of this our native heaven, ethereal sons, our puissance is our own right hand shall teach us highest deeds, by proof to try who is our equal. Then thou shalt behold whether by supplication we intend address, and to begirt the almighty throne, beseeching or besieging. This report, these tidings carry to the anointed king, and fly ere evil intercept thy flight. He said, and as the sounds of waters deep, hoarse murmur echoed to his words, applause through the infinite host. Nor less for that the flaming seraph, fearless, though alone, encompassed round with foes, thus answered bold. O alienate from God, O spirit accursed, forsaken of all good, I see thy fall determined, and thy hapless crew involved in this perfidious fraud. Contagion spread both of thy crime and punishment. Henceforth no more be troubled how to quit the yoke of God's Messiah, whose indulgent laws will not be now vouchsafed. Other decrees against thee are gone forth without recall. That golden scepter which thou didst reject is now an iron rod to bruise and break thy disobedience. Again, citing Psalm 2. Well thou didst advise, yet not for thy advice or threats I fly these wicked tents devoted, lest the wrath impendent, raging into sudden flame, distinguish not. For soon expect to feel his thunder on thy head, devouring fire, when then who created thee lamenting learn, when who can uncreate thee thou shalt know. So spake the seraph Abdiel, faithful found, among the faithless, faithful only he, among innumerable false, unmoved, unshaken, unseduced, unterrified, his loyalty he kept, his love, his zeal, nor number, nor example with him wrought, to swerve from truth, or change his constant mind, though single. From amidst them forth he passed long way through hostile scorn, which he sustained superior, nor of violence feared aught. And with retorted scorn his back he turned on those proud towers to swift destruction doomed. Thus ends the 5th book. Extraordinary passage. Walks out of their midst. All of them hostile. Imagine the scorn, whatever. So the first is the beginning of the rebellion. That is the council that Satan, now so-called in heaven, has instigated against God the Father, under the guise that God is a tyrant who will oppress them and not recognize their dignity, which was amply rebutted by Abdiel, who also then left undiminished. And of course, the individual speaking the truth in spite of opposition is none other than Milton's ideal of the ideal Christian, which he articulates in Areopagitica, as we've already seen. A demonstration of that. And so some, as I say, have seen Abdiel as Milton's hero. And he is an instance of a hero, there's no doubt. But he's not the instance of heroism entirely. That would not fit with Milton's theology if it were so. Book 6. I'm not going to get through it all. I've got a video on this already, the battles. But there are 3 days of battle. Let me just say that. The 3 days of battle, echoing in some ways the 3 days of the great events surrounding Good Friday to Easter Sunday. And so there again, once again, the use of number in Milton is not without import. Very significant. As I say, the careful crafting of the epic does not only include the language and the ideas, but also even the structure and the ordering. And so Raphael continues to relate how Michael and Gabriel were sent in battle. And so there's 3 days of fight. The first fight, they retire under night. They invent engines, which are like cannon. So on day 2, they wheeled out during the nightfall. They invent cannons, and then on day 2, they put Michael and Gabriel to rout with these engines. And on day 3, God sends Messiah forth, and then there is no fight. At the mere sight of Messiah, the third of the angel cohort backs up, and just simply falls. So there isn't even a fight. Now, as I say, as it was recounted in book 1, there was this great battle, and it was unclear who was going to be victor or whatever. The account told in book 6 puts it rather differently, to put it mildly, because God does not even fight them. He just appears, and that's enough to conclude the defeat, and drives him out and return. So where shall I begin here, since I have just a few minutes? I'll pick it up at line, let's return at least the praise of Abdiel. Servant of God, well done. Line 29. Well hast thou fought the better fight, who single hast maintained against revolted multitudes the cause of truth, in word mightier than they in arms, and for the testimony of truth has borne universal reproach, far worse to bear than violence. For this was all thy care, to stand approved in sight of God. Though worlds judge thee perverse, the easier conquest now remains thee, aided by this host of friends. Back on thy foes more glorious to return, than scorn thou didst depart, and to subdue by force, who reason for their law refuse, right reason for their law, and for their King Messiah, who by right of merit reigns. Go, Michael of celestial armies prince, and thou in military prowess next, Gabriel, lead forth to battle these my sons invincible. Lead forth my armed saints, by thousands and by millions ranged for fight, equal in number to that godless crew rebellious, them with fire and hostile arms, fearless assault, and to the brow of heaven pursuing, drive them out from God and bliss, into their place of punishment, the gulf of Tartarus, which ready opens wide his fiery chaos to receive their fall. So now hell exists. Wasn't there before? It's ready. The outcome of all this is now waiting. Now remember, the word Tartarus is a pagan type of hell. It's referred to in the Greeks and in the Romans. It's a type of hell. It isn't hell, as they don't understand in relation to the one true God, but still it's an understanding that there is such a place where evil is punished. So spake the sovereign voice, and clouds began to darken all the hill, and smoke to roll in dusky wreaths. Reluctant flames, the sign of wrath awaked. Nor with less dread the loud ethereal trumpet from on high again blow, at which command the powers militant that stood for heaven in mighty quadrate joined of union irresistible, moved on in silence their bright legions to the sound of instrumental harmony that breathed heroic ardor to adventurous deeds under their godlike leaders in the cause of God and his Messiah. So now the army marches out in harmony, unified out of love. They go through this. And Satan, in response to this, with vast and haughty strides advanced, came towering, armed in adamant and gold. Abdiel that sight endured not, where he stood. So Abdiel, who's left on his own, is now with the armies, and we've got Satan and Abdiel against one another. Where he stood among the mightiest, bent on highest deeds, and thus his own undaunted heart explores. O heaven, that such resemblance of the highest should yet remain, where faith and reality remain not. Wherefore should not strength and might where virtue fails? Or weakest prove where boldest, though to sight unconquerable? His puissance trusting to the Almighty's aid. I mean to try, whose reason I have tried unsound and false, nor is it aught but just that he who in debate of truth hath won should win in arms and in both disputes alike victor, though brutish that contest and foul when reason hath to deal with force, yet so most reason is that reason overcome? So pondering, and from his armed peers, forth stepping opposite, halfway he met his daring foe. At this prevention more incensed, and thus securely him defied. So Abdiel comes and he's going to take him on in arms now, where before he did in words. Proud art thou met, thy hope was to have reached the height of thy aspiring unopposed, the throne of God unguarded, and his side abandoned at the terror of thy power or potent tongue. Fool, not to think how vain against the omnipotent to rise in arms, who out of smallest things could without end have raised incessant armies to defeat thy folly, or with solitary hand reaching beyond all limit, at one blow unaided could have finished thee and whelmed thy regions under darkness. But thou seest all are not of thy train. There be who faith prefer and piety to God, who then to thee not visible, when I alone seemed in thy world erroneous to dissent from all. My sect thou seest, now learned too late, how few sometimes may know when thousands err. Lesson to us as well. The truth is not necessarily a matter of majority rule or an opinion poll. And Satan comes back just as well. And Abdiel once again retorts to him and says this, 180. This is servitude to serve the unwise. So you claim that God's a tyrant. You are the one. Serving the unwise is the definition of servitude. To serve the unwise, or him who hath rebelled against his worthier, as thine now serve thee, thyself not free, but to thyself enthralled. Remember the echoing of book 3? Free he must remain till he enthrall himself. Exactly same echoing here. Yet lewdly darest our ministering, upbraid, reign thou in hell thy kingdom, let me serve in heaven God ever blessed, and his divine behests obey, worthiest to be obeyed, yet chains in hell not realms expect. Meanwhile, from me returned, as erst thou saidst, from flight, this greeting on thy impious crest receive. So saying, a noble stroke he lifted high, which hung not, but so swift with tempest fell on the proud crest of Satan, that no sight nor motion of swift thought less could his shield such ruin intercept. So he belts him on the head, right on the top of his head. 10 paces huge his back, he back recoiled, the 10th on bended knee his massy spear upstayed. As if on earth winds underground or waters forcing way sidelong had pushed a mountain from his seat, half sunk with all his pines. Amazement seized the rebel thrones, but greater rage to see thus foiled their highest, their mightiest, ours joy filled, and shout, presage of victory and fierce desire of battle, whereat Michael bid sound the archangel trumpet. Through the vast of heaven it sounded, and the faithful armies rung Hosanna to the highest, nor stood at gaze the adverse legions, nor less hideous joined the horrid shock. Now storming fury rose, and clamor such as heard in heaven till now was never. Arms on armor clashing brayed horrible discord, and the madding wheels of brazen chariots rage. Dire was the noise of conflict. Overhead the dismal hiss of fiery darts, and flaming volleys flew, and flying vaulted either host with fire. So huge battle ensues. As I say, on the second, and then there's a return. Michael also comes in here and gives Satan a taste of God's wrath. Where should I pick? Line 320 is where it is. If nature's concord broke among the constellation, war were sprung, 2 planets rushing from aspect in the line of fiercest opposition in mid-sky. But the sword of Michael from the armory of God was given him tempered so that neither keen nor solid might resist that edge. It met the sword of Satan with steep force to smite, descending, and in half cut sheer, nor stayed, but with swift wheel reverse, deep entering, shared all his right side. Then Satan first knew pain, and writhed him to and fro, convolved, so sore the gritting sword, with discontinuous wound passing through him, but the ethereal substance closed, not long divisible. And from the gash, a stream of nectarous humor issuing flowed sanguine, such as celestial spirits may bleed. And all his armor stained erewhile so bright. Forthwith on all sides, to his aid was run by angels many and strong, who interposed defense, while others bore him on their shields back to his chariot, where it stood retired from off the files of war. There they him laid, gnashing for anguish and despite and shame, to find himself not matchless, and his pride humbled by such rebuke, so far beneath his confidence to equal God in power. Yet soon he healed, for spirits that live throughout, vital in every part, not as frail man in entrails, heart or head, liver or reins, cannot but by annihilating die, nor in their liquid texture mortal wound receive, no more than can the fluid air. All heart they live, all head, all eye, all ear, all intellect, all sense, and as they please they limn themselves, and color, shape, or size assume as likes them best, condense or rare. And then we go to Gabriel. So we get this vast theater of war. As I say, it goes for 3 days. On the third day, Messiah comes forth and rides towards them. And the mere appearance of this, but there's debate in amongst the infernal ranks. Satan on day 2. There's the building of cannons, if you will, line 576. Belial comes and speaks, and the father, having suffered some losses on day 2 because of the cannons, decides to send his son out, which was his intent from the beginning, to defeat his enemies, because he said he'd crush them with a rod of iron. Now he will do exactly that. Sends him forth, and as I say, his mere appearance is enough to drive them off. And so line 760, we'll just pick it up there, and I'll conclude with this. He in celestial panoply, all armed of radiant Urim. So he's wearing the Urim and Thummim that are on Aaron's breastplate. Exodus 28:30. The Urim and Thummim, which are on Aaron's breastplate, the high priest of God. Work divinely wrought, ascended at his right hand, victory sat eagle-winged. Beside him hung his bow and quiver with 3 bolted thunder stored, and from about him fierce effusion rolled of smoke and bickering flame and sparkles dire. Off he goes and sends him out, and 825, his countenance too severe. Too severe to behold and full of wrath, bent on his enemies. At once the 4 spread out their starry wings with dreadful shade, contiguous, and the orbs of his fierce chariot rolled as with the sound of torrent floods or a numerous host. He on his impious foes right onward drove, gloomy as night. Under his burning wheels the steadfast Empyrean shook throughout, all but the throne itself of God. Full soon among them he arrived, in his right hand grasping 10,000 thunders, which he sent before him, such as in their souls infixed plagues. They, astonished, all resistance lost, all courage, down their idle weapons dropped, o'er shields and helms and helmed heads he rode, of thrones and mighty seraphims prostrate, that wished the mountains now might be again thrown on them as a shelter from his ire. So he rides out in their midst, and they drives them down, and down they go into the pit of hell. And it concludes the passage with Adam being recounted what he wished to know, thus measuring things in heaven by things on earth. Remember, this is an analogy. He's telling it to a physical being. At thy request, and that thou mayest beware by what is past. To thee I have revealed what might have else to human race been hid, the discord which befell and war in heaven among the angelic powers, and the deep fall of those too high aspiring who rebelled with Satan. He who envies now thy state, who now is plotting how he may seduce thee also from obedience, that with him, bereft of happiness, thou mayst partake his punishment, eternal misery, which would be all his solace and revenge, as a despite done against the Most High, thee once to gain companion of his woe. But listen not to his temptations, warn thy weaker. Let it profit thee to have heard by terrible example the reward of disobedience. Firm they might have stood, yet fell. Remember, and fear to transgress. So again, if it's repeated as once, twice, 3 times, it's over and over.